Lead us in the pledge.
My pleasure. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Welcome everyone this evening. We've got a resolution we're going to consider in a minute that's important to us. A couple of announcements. Want to thank those who were involved in the Martin Luther King Day celebration here in LaGrange this past week. The McGee's, Deacon Branch, and a lot of the LaGrange ministerium. Always a great event. It was a full room, and we appreciate the spirit of the event and those who put it together. We have our annual budget workshop, which will be held on Saturday. This is an annual budget workshop where we have each of the department heads go through our budget priorities as they're forming for consideration by fellow board members. That budget workshop is scheduled for Saturday, March 7th at 8 a.m. in the lower level conference room here in the Village Hall. A draft of that budget will be available ahead of time at the library and online, and we will invite everyone to participate who wishes to in that discussion. Later in this meeting, we're going to be having our annual capital discussion as we form that budget. We're going to, with permission from the board, we've got the application under consent agenda. I would, if it's okay with you, recommend we do the capital workshop after that and conduct our regular business. So without, I see head nods, so we'll go ahead and proceed along those lines. At the end of the meeting today, we will be moving into closed session. That is for the purpose of looking at an agreement from the Water Reclamation District, the MWRD, as it relates to our stormwater management. We will, after we have the discussion in closed session, we'll certainly report out to the public at our next meeting the results of that, but because it's a matter that has been and continues technically to be in litigation, we want to protect our fellow citizens' interests and make sure everything is in order, do our due diligence, and then open that up to you as we discuss it at our next meeting, which is February the 10th. With that, we have a resolution here today that is very important to us, and we've got the League of Women Voters here in LaGrange and LaGrange area that have been promoting this, but it's really important to the whole village. And Mr. Clerk, if I could ask you to read this into the record, and then we will make comment. Resolution celebrating the 100th anniversary of the League of Women Voters. So, Mr. Clerk, please.
Certainly, it's my honor. Whereas on February 14, 1920, the League of Women Voters, the League, was formed at the Congress Hotel in Chicago, Illinois. And whereas the League was formed 6 months prior to, but in anticipation of ratification of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote in the United States. And whereas from the beginning, the League determined that it would be nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing any political party or individual candidate. And whereas the League continues today as a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. And whereas today, the League is composed of members in over 700 local, county, and state leagues in all 50 states, plus the District of Columbia, the Virgin Islands, and Hong Kong. And whereas among those state leagues is the League of Women Voters of Illinois, which was incorporated on March 22nd, 1920, and in turn is composed of over 40 local leagues with almost 4,000 members. And whereas among those local leagues in Illinois is the League of Women Voters of the LaGrange area, which was incorporated as the League of Women Voters of LaGrange in 1924, and in turn is composed of more than 100 members. And whereas members of the League first study and then take action on a broad range of issues after reaching consensus on positions. And whereas leagues at all levels, among other activities, register voters, educate voters by holding candidate forums and publishing voter guides, publish public policy research, and hold meetings on key issues. And whereas the League is a civic organization that has fought since 1920 to improve government and engage everyone in the decisions that impact their lives. And whereas the League will celebrate its 100th anniversary on February 14th, 2020. And now, therefore, be it resolved by the President and the Board of Trustees of the Village of LaGrange, Cook County, and State of Illinois, that the Village of LaGrange declares February 14, 2020 as a date to celebrate the League of Women Voters and its vision of a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Lori Braun to come up and make some introductions of the group here as best she can. So if we could have the microphone tuned up. But to the board, this is a resolution. It is an action item before you on the agenda this evening. Is there a motion?
I'd like to move to accept the recommend resolution.
Thank you, Trustee McCarty. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Trustee Holder. It's been moved and seconded. Are there any comments on the resolution as presented this evening? Seeing none, voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The resolution is passed with enthusiasm. And again, the League of Women Voters is a very important voice in LaGrange for information sharing, for advocacy, and the stronger they are, the stronger we are. And this is a very special year, 100 years ago. So we really honor that and appreciate that. And Lori, if I may ask you to step up and say a word or two and maybe introduce as many as you can from the League there, or pass the mic, however you want to handle that.
Maybe I'm sorry it's such a good turnout. Thank you very much. We really thank you for your support of the League. One of our key tenets is that democracy is not a spectator sport, and I think you've seen many of these faces throughout the years because Leaguers do participate in government. And the other half of that is to have a government that listens, and you have been wonderful in terms of that. So we're very proud of all of you as well. So yes, we have a good turnout here, although we represent 11, 12, 13 communities or so. We have a great number from LaGrange. So this is just a small sampling, but I'd like to introduce Jim Wilson, Marion Honnell Wilson, Rick Blackwell, Linda Christensen, Laura Taylor, Cynthia Shilsky, Sue Wistoff, Judy Kerr, and Sandy Kerr. So
Again,
thank you again.
Indeed, many leaders in the community, so thank you. We see other members that serve on our boards and commissions out there as I look out. We've got Justin Hansen and John Janowski, who served on our communications committee, Laura Taylor, Lori Braun, and Linda Christensen on our Environmental Quality Control Commission, and John Pappas, our zoning board. So thank you for your service and participation. With that, Madam Manager, do you have any other matters besides the capital budget this evening?
Thank you. One matter. The village excavated a substantial portion of LaGrange Road and Harris Avenue last night to repair a significant water main break within the intersection. Unfortunately, the repair was not able to be completed in the planned time frame. Therefore, crews are planning to come back tonight to finish the repair. To finish the repair, the water main on LaGrange Road from Harris Avenue to 56 South LaGrange Road will need to be shut down. The time frame for the work is planned to be from midnight to 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. The repair may extend this time period should the repair become more extensive than we expected.
Okay, thank you, Andre. Any questions for Andre this evening? All right, seeing none, Mr. Clerk, if you could read the items on the consent agenda.
Certainly. Matters on the consent agenda will be considered by a single motion and vote because they have already been fully considered at the board at a previous meeting or have been determined to be of a routine nature. Any member of the Board of Trustees may request that an item be moved from the consent agenda to current business for separate consideration. Item A, ordinance, design review permit 111, 75 South LaGrange Road, Milk Money Brewing. Item B, ordinance, amending Chapter 111 of the LaGrange Code of Ordinances regarding alcoholic liquor. Item C, ordinance, creating an additional Class A2 liquor license and Class D2 beer club liquor license, Milk Money Brewing, LLC, doing business as Milk Money Brewing. Item D, minutes of the Village of LaGrange Board of Trustees regular meeting Monday, January 13, 2020. Item E, consolidated voucher 200127.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and we have no items under current business this evening. So with that, we would move on to item 4 on our agenda this evening, which are public comments regarding matters that are on our agenda this evening. Any comments from the public at this point?
Good evening. My comment is with Milk Money Brewing. There's already been a lot of excitement on Facebook, on the Chicago area home brewery, microbreweries page. And I think LaGrange would be a destination for a lot of people that travel to microbreweries. And once they come to our town, they would see other things that we have to offer, and they will come back, not just for Milk Money, or to see what else we have to offer.
Okay, thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
And for our minutes, what's your name? Or we need to get your name just for our minutes, public minutes.
My name is Eric Blex, B like in baby, Loeckks.
Thank you. Other comments regarding matters that are on our agenda this evening? Seeing none, we'll move to item number 5, which is our consideration of our consent agenda. Mark Birkeland, we will take these individually in this order.
Well, I think you can just call for a regular consent.
Okay, Mark says we can call for regular consent. So we'll talk about this in comprehension. We'll talk about if somebody has a question on the design review permit or on the liquor license or on the application itself, the A2, or the changes to the code, that's all fair game, and then we'll take it in total. So with that, why don't we discuss any questions or comments from the board on items A through C. And then we'll make a motion in a
What
second
about
for
D&E?
minutes. What's that?
No, not D&E also? Not the whole consent agenda?
Well, comments on items A through C, and then we'll handle D&E, the minutes, and the voucher.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
On C, creating an additional class A2 and an additional class D2. D1. First of all, are these the only ones that, is this the only one, this is the brand new 2 categories? And secondly, I'm curious what A1 and D1 are.
Sure. Want to take a crack at that?
So the second answer to your question is that the village does not have a bunch of licenses. So only the only number of licenses there are the number of licensed establishments. So whenever there is a new establishment that wants a license, it's this board that creates that license. And then when an establishment that has a license leaves, that license automatically is expired. So that the answer to your one question. The A2 license is a standard full service restaurant license, and that exists in the code. The B2 license also is a standard license, but it has been revised slightly to include the types of activities, including a beer club, that Milk Money is requesting. So both of those licenses have existed for a while. One of them has been amended a little bit to broaden so that it fits the request of the license applicant.
Is there a D1?
I believe there is a D1.
There is a D1 license. The D2 is for a beer club, and I'm not,
Wine club.
yeah, there's a wine club license as well.
Right.
And then the A1 is also a restaurant license, but I believe that's for beer and wine only.
Okay. But do we know what D1 is?
I don't recall.
Yeah, I know that it is
I can direct your attention to
Yeah.
page 19, 5-B-23. That's going to tell you that a D1 is a grocery retail tasting license.
Oh, thank you, Mark.
And again, A2 is in the code.
Right. We just,
I think the word additional may be, I understand why you would ask that, yeah. Other questions? Trustee McCarty.
Thank you, President Livingston. This perhaps is for charity. So I would assume that in addition to this being a restaurant, it's also classified as manufacturing? Is that correct from a zoning standpoint?
One work? Okay. It's a brew pub under the zoning code. So a brew pub is defined in the zoning code as an establishment where beer is brewed on premises principally for consumption in an adjoining full-service restaurant. So that is what this application is for. It's for a brew pub. So they are brewing beer on premises, but it is not principally a distribution facility. Principally, the beer that is brewed there will be consumed also on site
But the changes do allow it to be shipped off-site for sales, correct?
with limits.
With limits.
Mhm.
And where does it draw the, when does it become a manufacturing?
I believe the limit is set at 5% of the beer can be distributed for off consumption.
But in terms of total gallons, or right now it's limited to, I think, 3,100 gallons a month.
Okay.
When does it become, when does it have to be regulated more like an industry or a manufacturing process?
The way that the zoning code is written, it's not as much about the quantity of the beer that's being distributed, but whether that quantity represents the majority of the beer that's being brewed on the premises. So a very small facility would brew less in total, but still the majority of the beer that's brewed there must be served on premises.
Okay.
The large facility.
So if they become like the Hofbrauhaus and they're selling hopefully 10,000 gallons a month, there are industrial or manufacturing implications: smell, wastewater, water treatment, all that. Is that built into this, despite the fact that it's not classified as manufacturing?
That the liquor code is being proposed amended for the license has limits on the overall production. So if they wanted to grow and expand and add more tanks, and they're somewhat limited in their production based on the build out that they have as well. So if they want to grow and expand, they would have to come back and revisit with the Liquor Commission, revising the liquor license.
And things like sanitation are already covered in codes,
There's
state and local.
health codes? And
Yes.
then what about noxious fumes, or if the neighbors object to the smell or something like that?
I do not know what regulation would apply to that. I haven't studied that.
But in general, our manufacturing code requires certain limits on smells off-site and things like that, right? Wouldn't that protect the residents also for this?
Because of the nature of this being a restaurant that has some brewing, I'm not sure whether an industrial code like that would apply. I know that the state does regulate it, and I know that we have codes that have those standards, but I have not studied whether they apply to a restaurant that has an accessory brewing facility.
And is this brewing facility gonna be state licensed also? Is that a separate license that's required?
Yes.
Okay. And then I would assume then in the building permit process, things like wastewater capture and things like that are to code?
other questions? All right, that's okay, Charity. If we need it again, we'll run another mic over, but other questions on the motions?
Then I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you, Trustee Holder. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Trustee Gale. It's been moved and seconded. Further questions or comments on the consent agenda approval? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, roll call vote.
Trustee Kukler.
Aye.
Trustee Katina.
Aye.
Trustee Gale.
Aye.
Trustee Holder.
Aye.
Trustee Augustine.
Mr. Clerk, Mr. President, before I vote, I just want to do my standard
Oh, sure.
recusal. As I previously stated, I recuse myself from voting on items on the voucher related to the village prosecutor. But in relation to what we're voting on right now, my vote is an aye.
Thank you. Trustee Augustine.
And Trustee Augustine, that is yes with your,
I'm sorry, yes, I said aye. Sorry.
Trustee McCarty.
Aye.
With that, the motion passes all ordinances, and congratulations. We know that you have a specific timing with milk money to start the brewing process, the construction process. So we understood that there was lead time, and we know how each business has to really get the timing right, and they're putting in quite a bit of effort. So we really do appreciate the investment. I also want to thank Trustee Kukler and Kutinek and the village team, Charity, everyone for the investigations at the Liquor Control Commission level. This is new ground, and as you all know, LaGrange, we do try to be casting our eyes to that next horizon. We believe that this represents that. And so anything we can do, you know, our door is open. We know there's a lot more to do, and this was an important step in the process from a design review. We've changed the LaGrange Liquor Code, and we'll be working with you very closely. So again, thank you to the other trustees. And with that, we have no other items under current business. Public comments regarding matters that are not on our agenda, item 7 this evening. Seeing none, item 8, trustee comments. Trustee Holder.
I'd like to second your comments with regard to the substantial investment you guys have made in our community. I appreciate it, and I'm glad we were able to work together to reshape some of these codes and to use some that we have so that it best serves all of our interests. Very, very much looking forward to seeing the impact you have, not to mention tasting your beer. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Holder. Other comments this evening from trustees? All right, seeing none, I would seek a motion from the board to move into closed session. Oh, gosh, what am I doing? I skipped the capital budget. You know, we need a capital budget. So I knew there was something we were missing. All right. Thank you very much. My apologies. You're right. Thank you, Trustee Holder. Why don't I turn this over to Andre Peterson, and we can get going on what we've all studied very hard on in our capital budget, including myself. So, Andre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. This evening, staff appreciates the opportunity to facilitate a capital projects workshop as a key component of our annual budget development process. The proposed budget anticipates a surplus fund balance at the end of the 5-year budget period, which demonstrates the ability to fund the identified projects over this time period. The proposed plan for capital improvements demonstrates a continued emphasis on the maintenance and replacement of the village's aging infrastructure. The capital improvements plan has also been designed to execute on the strategic priorities identified by the village board. Director of Public Works Ryan Gillingham will present a status report and staff recommendations for the capital projects, water and sewer funds in that order. We have streamlined the report to focus primarily on projects that were completed last year or are proposed for this upcoming year. However, staff is prepared to answer any questions regarding previous or current projects. With your permission, Mr. President, I would ask Mr. Gillingham to begin the presentation.
Thank you. Ryan?
Well, thank you very much. I think as you all know, this is one of my favorite meetings of the year. It's an opportunity for us to look at our past accomplishments over the past year, as well as looking forward to setting priorities for the next 5 years. So as Andre said, the format is we're going to talk about capital projects first, followed by the water fund and then the sewer fund. So we have about 40 projects or so to go through. So as we're going through each one, I'm going to give a brief update, but feel free to interrupt and ask questions as we're going through. All right? So the first project we have is the Stone Avenue train station renovation. So this project consisted of making improvements to the bicycle, sidewalk, ADA, as well as in parking enhancements at the Stone Avenue station. The project was largely completed in early 2019. The total cost for the project was $1.7 million and was entirely funded by grants. Since this is a federally funded project, it usually takes about 2 to 3 years to close the project out. So over the next 1 to 2 years, you'll probably see some agreements needing to be approved by the board to close out the engineering and construction contracts that have been completed. Next is the Edgewood Avenue reconstruction project from 47th to 51st. So in the 2016 street condition report, this road section was identified as needing repairs. The village applied for, but unfortunately wasn't selected for federal aid designation for this route. In 2018, the village applied for and received a grant through Cook County to complete the engineering for this roadway. The grant was in the amount of $137,000. The total cost to complete the engineering and the specifications is approximately $275,000. Project alternatives have been completed, and those have been provided to the village board. We had a public information meeting as well as the EQC. The next steps in the process will be to finalize the cost estimates, select an alternative, and then complete the engineering plans and specifications. We expect that that component of the project will be, or the final component of the project will be completed in the second quarter of 2020. We don't have an exact cost estimate for the alternatives because the final alternative hasn't been selected, but preliminary estimates are that the project could range anywhere between $4 to $5 million. And we note that funding for construction of this roadway has not yet been identified. Next is the Brewster Avenue.
Brian, I have a question on
Sure.
that. 275 to do all the engineering and whatnot that you did for that seems much higher than usual, doesn't it?
So typically, there's a couple different ways we look at how we value engineering. One of the ways to look at engineering is a percentage of construction cost. So if you're looking at roughly about 8% of $4 million, that would be somewhere less than $200,000 or $400,000. 10% would be $400,000. So from that vantage point, 275 seems about the right number. There are some additional project components and costs with this project that we normally wouldn't incur because we are considering a redesign of the roadway. So it's not just replacing as is, but also includes the public meetings, looking at various alternatives, preparing reports, looking at bicycle lanes, pedestrian paths, right-of-way, and there are some other environmental issues. So it's a little more complicated, but even that, it still is, in my opinion, within the range of what we would expect for a project of this size.
All right, thank you.
So the next project is the Brewster Avenue resurfacing. So the center line of Brewster Avenue from Spring to LaGrange Road serves as the boundary between LaGrange and LaGrange Park. This roadway was identified also in the 2016 report as needing to be repaired. LaGrange and LaGrange Park worked cooperatively for the resurfacing. In advance of the resurfacing, the village also replaced the water main underneath the roadway, which we'll talk more about in the water fund. The project was completed in the summer of 2019 at an approximate cost of $89,000. And again, we'll talk about the water main below the roadway as part of the water fund. Next is the Village Hall generator. Currently, there is not a backup power source for Village Hall. So some of the computers and phone systems, it's important to have backup power for those. So this year, we've budgeted $10,000 to complete the engineering for a generator for Village Hall. and we've budgeted $75,000 next year for the installation of that generator.
Hey, Ryan?
Yeah.
Is the police and fire station, is that on backup generator?
It is, and in fact, that generator powers the entire facility, not just computer networks and phone systems.
And the scope of this is just for computers and phones and emergency lighting?
We're going to look at both in terms of an overall cost estimate, but where we think we're headed is that it's going to be just to be able to manage the phone systems and the emergency, just basically the systems that need to be powered during an emergency, such as the phones and the computers, to keep things going.
Do we currently have an orderly shutdown, battery backup or anything, or is it just dead?
We do have some battery backup systems on some of the servers.
Just on the
But-
individual servers, it's not a system?
Correct.
And with your new phone system, is there any ability, instead of backing up this, switch the phone systems to the police and fire and take a walk?
The new phone system is actually located at the police department in their server room. One of the things that we're also looking at in this year's budget is relocating or consolidating the servers here at Village Hall and Public Works, and locating them all over at the police department because they have the backup facility. So it would be a real limited backup system here at Village Hall.
So one of the addition, to keep the phone systems working, the switches also have to have power as well to keep the phone systems running, so those would be included.
All right, thanks.
So the next is the south of 47th Street drainage improvements. As you know, a number of initiatives have been undertaken in response to severe flooding that occurred in the village over the past number of years. Specifically, a referendum was passed in 2015 to address these severe flooding issues, and the project, as you know, the 50th Street storm sewer was funded through that referendum. The project was stopped and delayed from its original schedule due to litigation with the quarry. The village and the quarry have reached an agreement that settles the issues raised in the lawsuit. In summary, the solution to the project has three components. The first is the construction of the 50th Street storm sewer, which picks up the drainage in the depressional areas. The next component is a pipe that routes the water around the quarry, and then the third component is a reservoir that stores the water and then discharges it to the McCook ditch. The total funds available for construction and construction engineering for the 50th Street project is approximately $14.5 million. The village has been in the process of negotiating an intergovernmental agreement with MWRD. Once this agreement is finalized, property acquisition and engineering work will begin. The overall project schedule is to have the project completed in approximately 5 years. Next is the North Route Pipe. So this is the one component of the 50th Street project that I just talked about. We have a separate line item for the North Route Pipe to recognize the cost or the settlement funds that were received from the quarry in the amount of $9.1 million. And so again, this is a separate line item within the budget. The estimated cost for the North Route Pipe is approximately $10.1 million. Next is the fire department apparatus floor. In 2012, a structural analysis was completed in response to potential structural deficiencies in the apparatus floor. Since this time, staff has completed the following activities. We've performed structural tests on the apparatus floor to determine that the beams within the fire station have sufficient capacity. Second, we've repaired deteriorated concrete in the front apparatus bay. And then the third thing that we've done is we've added supports below the rear apparatus bay to support the existing floor. Long term, we expect that the floor will continue to deteriorate as the chlorides from salts continue to interact with the reinforcing steel in the concrete, causing the reinforcing steel to expand and popping the concrete. So we expect there will continue to be patching in the floor necessary. For this next year, we've budgeted engineering for this year to replace the rear apparatus floor and to repair the additional areas where concrete repair is needed, with construction scheduled for next year. Next is the Village Hall fountain. The fountain outside of Village Hall here was damaged from vandalism in 2018. A cast iron fountain was put in its place in the amount of about $28,000. This past year, we added a railing around the fountain to deter people from entering the pool around the fountain, and that seems to have been successful. Next is the LaGrange Road train station planters. In order to address railroad safety concerns related to the proximity of the station to the roadway, 15 planter boxes were added on the north side of Burlington between the roadway and the building. These planter boxes were installed this past year in the amount of $71,000, and it was entirely funded by a grant from Metro. Next is the LaGrange Road train station parking improvements. Staff proposed to create 14 additional parking spaces where the existing taxi stand is located on Hillgrove Avenue on the north side of the platform there. Metro did not approve this redesign. However, they did indicate that they plan to include the redesign of this area as part of other improvements that they're considering as part of the LaGrange Road train station. And staff is currently working with Metro to define what the scope of work will be. Next is the northeast planning area. This project included a number of intersection improvements, so specifically we're talking about Ogden and LaGrange, as well as Ogden and Locust Avenue. The amount of $159,000 in the budget represents the village's final payment to IDOT for the work. Typically, again, these projects take several years to close out, so we'll keep rebudgeting the $159,000 until we see the final bill from the state. Just of note, the total project cost for the intersection improvements there was approximately $2.7 million, and the total cost to the village was about $97,000. Next is the LaGrange Road corridor improvements. So safety improvements were identified at the intersection of LaGrange Road and 52nd Street. These included rectangular rapid flashing yellow beacons on existing pedestrian signs. Unfortunately, IDOT did not approve this redesign. The village had received a grant from the DCO in the amount of $120,000 for this project, and then staff is looking to repurpose these funds towards streetscape improvements in the central business district. Next is the 50/50 sidewalk program. This program is where village residents split the cost with the village for the replacement of sidewalks. Over the last several years, the village has budgeted sufficient funds to address the backlog that has existed. In 2019, approximately 45 residents participated in the program at an approximate cost of $84,000. This program continues to be a very popular program with about 78 residents on the waiting list. In order to keep pace with demand, staff recommends budgeting $71,000 for sidewalk replacement this next fiscal year.
Brian, that satisfied the entire backlog for sidewalks?
It did, yes.
Okay. And then, if I can go back one item?
Sure.
What was the reason given for denying the 52nd Street crossing?
IDOT's policy is not to allow the rapid flashing beacons on multi-lane roadways because of the difficulty in seeing multiple cars because of the dual lanes. That when the pedestrian pushes a button, the other car may not see somebody crossing. So they have actually a set of policy for not allowing those in this particular case.
But there's one right over in Western Springs on 31st Street, isn't there?
This is a new policy.
Oh. And we got funds from a state agency, and another state agency said, nah.
That's correct.
We couldn't get the guys giving us the money to be influential with IDOT?
I believe that the grant funding was through a legislative initiative, and the village worked with IDOT and others to advocate for the installation of this, as well as another project I'll talk about in a little bit, which is the pedestrian crossing improvements at Wyola and 47th and 47th and 9th. And similarly, those projects were also not approved because it didn't meet IDOT's standards for implementation.
New standards. Thank you.
Hi, Ryan, thank you. Regarding the 50/50 program, we discussed it at a previous meeting, looking into, and you already were, revisiting for some of the sidewalks, the shaving and the grading of some of the bigger bumps was a decrease in costs and can be done relatively quickly. Are we still considering that, and is that factoring into any of this?
Yes, we are. And in fact, I think that, so to the first part of the question, we've met with several vendors, and we're currently developing the specifications so that we can have that available to us for next year. One of the ways that we're looking to do this as well is there are other opportunities beyond the 50/50 program where sidewalk cutting would be appropriate for us, independent of that, to say if we had a trip and fall incident, we need to make an immediate repair. In those kinds of instances, it makes a lot more sense to go ahead and trim the sidewalk rather than putting cold mix down and then waiting for the replacement. So not only are we looking to use it for that kind of situation, but also potentially replace some of the sidewalk, remove and replace. A lot of times for the remove and replace, you have a broken up piece of concrete and you don't have another option. However, there are some cases where it's a differential settlement where cutting that or shaving that piece off would make a lot more sense, and we're hoping that that might be available as part of the program too, but we have to look into that. All right, next is tree planting. So we strive to replant a replacement tree for each tree that's removed due to disease or damage. The average number of trees that we've planted over the past 5 years is 165 trees per year. And we're proposing this year, based on the number of trees we have identified, 97,500 for tree replacement. Next is the sewer televising program. So the village owns and maintains approximately 360,000 feet of sewer. The routine cleaning and televising of these sewers is important. We use this information that we collect from the sewer televising program to identify where we need repairs, as well as to identify what sewers we want to include in the sewer lining program. So staff proposes to continue with this program in the amount of $60,000 annually. The next project, which
Question, Ryan?
Sure.
The marvelous, I think it's only on cable, the sewer televising, but I don't get cable, so I've never seen it. But it's my understanding that this service is also available to residents if if a plumber has given them an indication that their sewer's collapsed, if the village will come and verify that. Is that correct?
So that's a little bit different than this program. So as part of this program, the way we bid it out, we're just getting pricing to televise mainline sewers. When a resident calls and where they have an outside clean out where the village doesn't have to go inside the home, we will help if we can. We have a small push camera, and so we, as a service to residents, we will go out there to see if we can help identify what might be the issue. And so they would call Public Works in those cases, and we will come out and schedule a time. And if there is outside accessibility, we will use our push camera to see if we can help.
And outside accessibility means an 8-inch clean out in the parkway?
6-inch.
6-inch clean out in the parkway. Okay, great, thanks.
So the next project is the 47th Street corridor improvements, and we were just talking about those a second ago. And again, this is a little bit different than 52nd. These were hawk signals. I'm not sure if you've seen them. There's a few places where they've been installed, but they provide for an actual stop condition. So the signals are dark, and then you push the button, and then they blink yellow, and then they blink red, and then call for the stop condition. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, IDOT did not approve for the installation of these devices at the intersections that the village asked for. So we had received funding in the amount of $240,000 for those two signals. We are looking to repurpose that funding as well towards streetscape improvements within the Central Business District, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Next is the Ogden Avenue corridor improvements. Also as part of the grant that was part of the 52nd Street and 47th was the addition of flashing yellow beacons on Ogden Avenue to alert motorists to the school zone. These flashing beacons were installed this past year on Ogden Avenue at 2 locations. We'd received a $40,000 grant for this project, and the final cost was about $27,000. Next project is the 47th and East Avenue intersection improvements. This intersection was identified as one of the priority improvements as part of the Joliet Road settlement. And the reason is that it had a number of accidents at this location, as well as its poor operational service levels. In 2017, IDOT completed the Phase 1 report for this intersection. The scope of work for this project includes signalization of 47th and East, making the spur ramp one-way southbound, street lighting upgrades, new sidewalks, as well as IDOT is planning to replace the sewers that exist below East Avenue, going underneath the IHB, as well as the sewers going down 47th Street. IDOT has completed the preliminary engineering plans for the project, and the village has provided comments on those plans. When asked about the schedule, IDOT has indicated to us that the project is planned in the next 2 to 4 years. A grant in the amount of $200,000 has been provided from the DCEO for the project, as well as $175,000 from MI Homes has been provided. And these grants would cover costs, would cover local costs. So things like sidewalks in the area, street lighting, as well as burial of overhead utilities. So it would include those items. Next is the neighborhood street projects. The purpose of the neighborhood street program is to plan for routine resurfacing and repair neighborhood streets on a defined schedule. In order to accomplish this goal, the village completed a street condition survey, or the first street condition survey in 2011. That street condition survey was then updated in 2016. The report showed a significant difference between the identified capital improvement needs for streets and current funding for roadways. This past year, as part of the program, the village completed two reconstruction projects: the reconstruction of Ashland Avenue from 47th Street to Harris, as well as the reconstruction of Blackstone from 47th Street to Cossett. We'll talk again about the water main construction below those roadways as part of the water fund. The current roadway condition study estimates that $18 million is needed to fund all of the identified roadway improvements as part of the 2016 report. Since 2018-19, the village has invested $2.4 million in roadways and $2.8 million in water mains. And then under the village's current pay-as-you-go program, there is $850,000 available each year for the next 3 years. So if you can turn to page 3A27, I want to point out a few things on the map there. So first, if you've got the map open, and again, that's 3A27, the lines that are highlighted in blue represent the streets that have been done over the last several years. And so as you can see, when you look at the colors that are beneath those blue lines, the village has taken a data-driven approach towards roadway reconstruction and resurfacing, using this data from the 2016 report to identify roadways that are in need of resurfacing or reconstruction. Similarly, when you looking forward and looking at what's highlighted in red, you'll see what the village staff is proposing for the next 3 years. So for the next year for resurfacing, we've highlighted what I'm calling the area in red near the hospital. And so if you can look at the underlying colors in that area, you'll see that the streets in the 2016 report were ranked as very poor and failed. The streets in this area are in need of resurfacing. However, they don't have the corresponding water main replacements that are beneath the roadway. For the next fiscal year, we're recommending Elm, Maple, and Goodman, the east-west streets just north of there, for resurfacing. You can see the condition rating below the highlight there. And again, we're not recommending for utility improvements below those roadways. And then in the third year, what we're recommending is the resurfacing of Brainerd Avenue. And that one's a little different. It's considered a collector roadway. because it's a collector roadway, it is a federal aid eligible route, which means that the village can apply for a grant through the federal government, and we can receive 70% of the funds for construction for that roadway. And so we're looking to have that roadway again scheduled in 22-23. However, though, with Brainerd Avenue, looking at the water main beneath that roadway, we are recommending that the water main be replaced, and so we've put a corresponding figure in the water fund for the replacement of the water main. And so that's what the village has proposed for the next 3 years.
Are you talking about Brainerd, only a portion of Brainerd?
Right, from 47th to Ogden.
Okay, thank you.
And then lastly, if the village considers alternate funding in addition to the pay-as-you-go method, such as a referendum, additional funding could be available to support current and ongoing infrastructure needs.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan at this juncture before we move to the next?
I
Please.
Several. On the neighborhood street resurfacing project on 3823, that chart runs over onto the next page, and you said the project came in at $98,352 under budget. I couldn't figure out why that came under budget, and is it something that we've improved upon, and is it therefore repeatable?
You're talking about the 1920 Ashland Blackstone project, I believe. Oh, I see it. Okay, $98,000. For this particular project, it's a pretty complicated project when we're talking about the reconstruction. We are always looking both during the design phase as well as during construction on ways that we can be more efficient and save money. In this particular case, I think it was just a matter of various quantities being less. So things like less disruption to the parkway, so there was less sodding. Those kinds of things can be variable during construction. Things that aren't variable are, say, like the length of curb, right? Since it was a complete reconstruction, we know exactly the amount of the amount of area for pavement as well as the length of curb. So those types of things aren't as variable. Usually projects like this come in over budget, generally because there's differing site conditions that develop, on projects such as these. So there's not necessarily something that's repeatable that we saw here, but again, we are always looking towards other methodology or ways to rebuild roadways that would be more efficient.
One of the things you and I have talked about is, with my alarm, what percentage of our streets are poor or worse. Has been, why are they deteriorating so quickly? And you've been able to explain that because of, I'm going to use a term, shortcut. I don't mean it pejoratively, but the capping that was done before. Could you take the rest of the village board through that technique and what that's led to with regard to limiting your capabilities for doing anything else to those roads?
Sure. I think Blackstone and Ashland are good examples of kind of the decisions that we're faced with when looking at, what to do with the particular roadway. In those particular cases, both of those roadways, the prior repairs that were done to the roadway was overlaid, meaning if you look at a traditional roadway, you'll see the curb and the gutter in the street. And say 20 years earlier, what the resurfacing method that they did is they just overlaid the roadway with additional asphalt. So they didn't repair any of the curbs that were broken. They overlaid the existing asphalt, or they overlaid the existing curbs with asphalt. And then so as the roadway continues to age and there's additional base failures, when we look at the roadway now today, or as we did when we were looking as to what the decision was for repair, the idea that we would be able to grind off the existing layer and put back another layer isn't what we recommend, because essentially there's a lot of areas below that pavement that are failed, and to do that would be putting funding, or it wouldn't be our recommendation, because just to resurface that roadway, you would end up with a road that would only have an additional lifespan of, say, 5 to 7 years before you're going to have to come back and do it again. And so,
Because the base is still, you're
the-
putting a Band-Aid over a base that's not solid.
that's correct.
This has become an issue. I don't know about you guys, but I've gotten a lot of questions about roads. It's of course the beginning of pothole season, and so it's probably going to become a much more frequent request. And we're very blessed that this is a big issue versus some of the conversations we've had to have before. I'd like to explore, and maybe it's a bond offering, I'd like to explore doing a lot more streets a lot sooner. Doing 3 streets a year when you see all the red on here, I mean, Mike, they're talking about doing your area in 3 years. Your area's coming apart right now. And so I'd like, in our planning and our conversations going forward, I'd like to talk about perhaps turning up the heat on this and being more responsive to what I think the voters are going to want from us with regard to fixing their streets. There's very little, it would probably take a referendum, but there's very little more, telling you I'm gonna fix your water main isn't the same as saying I'm gonna fix all your street. I mean, that's something very visible and everybody talks about, right? So it's something that I would like to focus on going forward. Well, last question, I apologize for monopolizing. Some of the streets that I see them do in Western Springs, all concrete, gorgeous. And I think, patching asphalt versus concrete, concrete just seems to be better. I don't know, because it's neater. I don't know if it actually is structurally or for useful life. What's the difference between doing a street in asphalt versus concrete? And what's the difference in cost and life?
Sure. So let me answer that.
I was going to ask this, so don't feel like I'm bushwhacking.
Well, I want to answer it in 2 parts. So the roadway program that we've identified for the next 3 years are all resurfacing of existing asphalt roadways. So that decision matrix of looking at asphalt and concrete wouldn't apply, because we're looking to grind off the existing layer of asphalt and put it back. However, though, when we're looking at the reconstruction of roadways, what I have seen effective in terms of making that decision is to bid the project in 2 ways, if that's the policy that the board wants to do. So you bid the project out with an equivalent section of asphalt, and then bid it out with also the same design concrete section. And then when the bids come in, the board can look at the difference in cost and then evaluate that in the context of the life cycle cost of the concrete versus asphalt. For residential roadways, the majority of Chicagoland communities choose asphalt. And the main reason for that is because of its lower initial cost.
But let's go for a little further that says, how long do they last? And can you give me a feel, is concrete twice as expensive, 10% more expensive? I don't have any idea.
I don't have figures because it depends on the
swag it.
design, but it is, sitting here, I would say it's 50% or more, 50% or more cost than asphalt. But again, I'd have to run the numbers because it depends on the cross section of the roadway that you're selecting.
How long does it last compared to asphalt?
Sitting here off the top of my head, I would give an asphalt roadway 20 to 25 years before it would need additional resurfacing or other significant rehabilitation. Concrete roadway, 30 or more years is what I would say for, before you would need additional work to that. So it definitely has a longer, in my opinion, life than asphalt. However, though, that has to be compared against the life cycle cost of asphalt, and that can be done as part of the bidding process and looking at equivalent cross sections.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Other questions? I've got a couple, but I want the board to go first. Trustee Gale?
Thanks, President Livingston. So, Ryan, it's not quite as big of a bucket as Trustee Holder was talking about, but we talked about repurposing some of the other, there's that 47th Street corridor, 57th Street pedestrian crossing. Can that be repurposed for the neighborhood street projects, or are we limited in what we can do with that since there are grants associated with it?
So since those grant funds are a legislative initiative that were originally identified for pedestrian safety, that would be something that we'd have to look into and work with the state legislators to see if that would be something that they would be willing to change.
Do you know, I'm glad you mentioned the state legislature. Is there any, maybe President Livingston or others might know too, I mean, if there's a capital program at the state level or even the federal level, I mean, does that float down to municipalities at some point where instead of us having to do a bond issue, which I think is something we should have to consider, is there some larger infrastructure program eventually going to shake through that we can tap into?
Sure. Well, let me answer that in three parts: the federal, the state, and the county. And again, it depends, and things change. From the federal level, my experience has been that the village has received a number of federal grants for roadway projects. However, those projects are for federal aid eligible routes. So that generally those are roadways like Cossett and Brainerd and Gilbert, where they're considered collector roadways, which is partially, which is one of the big reasons why we also applied for Edgewood Avenue to receive that designation in order to be able to receive funding. So that's the biggest source from the federal side. The state recently had a capital bill that was approved. The village did receive some funding through that. I don't remember the exact amount. So a few $100,000. And we continue to advocate with the state for additional funds as those might become available. However, though, I know that the state does have other, challenges and limited resources, so that might be difficult in the future. And then the last one is the county. The county did have their Invest and Cook program, for which the village did apply, and we received the money for the engineering. We plan to continue to apply for that grant program for construction. However, though, grant funds are limited. I believe that it's an $8 to $9 million program per year. So there's not a lot of money in that program spread across the number of municipalities that are in the Chicagoland area.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Trustee Gale. Other questions for Ryan or anybody? Ryan, just a clarification here. So the hospital section of LaGrange, we'll call it, and the east-west roads, provide us again the timing based on this plan when those happen.
Sure. So if approved by the board, we would be looking to resurface the streets in the hospital area this coming summer, so in 2020. And then the east-west roadways just north of there would be in the summer of 2021. So if approved, we've got to start right away on the engineering, so you'd see an agreement from for village board approval for the engineering here shortly.
So to the board, this is a step change, and thank you, Ryan and Lou and Andre, and I think Mark Kukler. We met during the course of the fall on this. Previously, we have here a $2.7 million capital budget. Previously, we would wait in a pay-as-you-go community for a couple of years and let those funds accumulate and go down to the pipes, right, and more substantial. And that allowed us to do Brewster and Ashland and Blackstone and some of the other streets. These others, we're not going to be waiting 3 years. We're going to be doing more in a slightly quicker time frame, and that is new. Sometimes you can play catch-up, and we've kind of entered that season. And I always think of the Grange street grid as an airport radar, and on the front side of the radar where we've just finished the work, it's blue and green and everything's fine and smooth, and on the back side it's red and it's rough. And so we've got enough of a wedge on the backside on those east-west roads and in the Field Club Hospital section, which is a great part of LaGrange, where we're going to be able to address that a little bit more quickly than we have. And then I think to Trustee Holder's point, that will have kind of finished the full sweep of the village, which takes the better part of the decade, and then it will be up to a future board as other bonds expire, as the work on the 50th Street Storm Sewer Project gets underway, what the appetite is to then address that through referendum or other needs. So I'd say the difference, we've gone through a lot of projects here, and probably the most significantly difference is the accelerated pace of the amount of roads we'll be doing in the next 24 months. Should you, board, approve in April this budget, which, again, this is just a foundation of the budget. We're not voting on it tonight, but this will be part of your discussion in March and certainly in April. All right. Ryan, why don't we move along then?
All right, next is the train station camera fiber project. The cameras at LaGrange Road train station and Stone Avenue station were upgraded to an integrated fiber network, allowing for high resolution and live monitoring. Funding for this project was provided by the West Suburban Mass Transit District in the amount of $98,000. These improvements were completed this past year. The total cost was $84,000. Next is the streetscape improvements. The streetscape components within the central business district are now 25 to 30 years old, and they're starting to show signs of deterioration. In order to refresh the streetscape elements, $25,000 was included in the budget to analyze existing conditions and develop proposed plans and specifications for improvements to the streetscape. Staff will be providing recommendations to the village board for consideration once the design elements have been identified and cost estimates have been prepared. Funding for construction has been included in the budget in the amount of $1.2 million. Next is the pedestrian push button signs. So as a pedestrian safety initiative, staff proposes to install pedestrian crossing signs that are push button activated and provide for a flashing lighted crossing on the sign at existing uncontrolled intersections. So these would be Brainerd and Elm next to the high school, Brainerd and 48th, as well as Edgewood Avenue and Burke's Court. These signs will be solar powered and again will be push button activated, and the approximate cost for all three signs is $21,000. Next is miscellaneous engineering. This account covers expenses for consulting engineering services that are not anticipated, not associated with a capital project, or require special expertise. As previously mentioned, we used funds from this account for the streetscape design in the amount of $25,000. And the other thing that we have budgeted out of this account is the long-term strategic plan for the Public Works facility. The village staff proposes to continue with the crack filling program for maintenance in the amount of $20,000 annually, as well as we propose to continue with the thermoplastic street marking program in the amount of $15,000 annually. Next is the sewer lining program. Again, the village has 360,000 feet of sewer. We use the information from the sewer televising program to identify what repairs we want to include in the sewer lining program. This program was put on hold for 2 years, for 19, 20, and 21, in order to be able to fund the Brewster Avenue resurfacing project. I'll talk about it a little bit in the sewer fund, but we will be proposing a sewer lining program for 2021 funded out of the sewer fund. Next is the Village Hall surface lot and parking lot 8. So both of these lots were in need of repair. The village applied for and received grant funding through the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District to replace these lots with permeable pavers. We received a grant in the amount of $298,000 from MWRD, and the final construction cost for this project is estimated to be about $500,000 in total. Similar to these two lots, parking lot 3, which is at the north side of the intersection of Madison and Harris, is also in need of replacement. The village applied for a grant fund for this lot as well, but unfortunately we weren't selected. And what we're recommending is that we continue applying for a green infrastructure grant for this lot, similar to the other two lots that we just finished. And then finally is the future outlook. This section is for projects that have been identified but not yet budgeted. The overall budget as presented for the Capital Projects Fund represents a surplus in the amount of $971,000 at the end of the 5-year budget period.
Questions for Ryan on this juncture? We have other funds, so there'll be plenty of opportunity. Go ahead.
All right, next is the water fund, and the first is the water rate. So the village's goal is to maintain reserves at about 50% of operating expenses. So based on the completion of the Blackstone and the Ashland projects, we estimate that the water fund reserves at the end of the fiscal year will be $445,000 or 7.5% of operating expenses. Therefore, in order to restore water fund reserves, no water main replacements or other capital projects are being planned for the current fiscal year. As per the village's policy, any additional increases from the city of Chicago would be passed along as part of future rate increases. To date, the village has not been notified of any water rate increases for the upcoming year. Therefore, no water rate increases are planned for fiscal year 2021. Water accountability for the village reached a peak in 2017 and 18 when the pumped versus billed ratio reached over 90%. So if I can draw your attention to page 3A45. And there are two graphs there that I want to point out. So you can see on the first graph where our water accountability by month peaked in roughly 2017 and 2018. And in several months, we were over 90%. Unfortunately, you can also see that as of recently, water accountability when comparing pump to build has dropped to be between the 70 and 80% range. As Andre talked about earlier, we're continually looking for these undiscovered water leaks that might be going into sewers. We currently have one that's going on right outside our front door here that we're repairing. But we recommend continuing with programs like doing the leak survey, bringing people in at night to look for undiscovered leaks, looking at water billing, doing audits of water billing. We're continuously looking for ways to improve water accountability. And you can see if you look at the next page, the red and the blue lines. So what you're looking at is a rolling 12-month average. The blue line represents the water billed to customers, and the red line represents the water that we're buying from McCook. And so you can see how, as those two lines converge, that's additional revenue that's made available to the village because we're buying less water. But as you can see, as of recent, those lines are diverging as residents are using a little bit less water over the last couple of years, and our usage is starting to increase again. And so once we have more information about some of the leaks that we found, we'll certainly look to update the board on these two charts.
You were going to bring in a leak service, am I correct?
We do, that's correct. So we do that yearly, once a year. We bring in a leak locating company, and they listen to every hydrant and valve within the village to determine if they can hear a sound related to a leak. Because of the data that we have, I think we're pretty sophisticated in knowing, because we're able to analyze the data on a daily, a weekly, or a monthly basis. So we know, based on our history, when there's a large leak in the system that's undiscovered. And so given the size of the leak, knowing that we were at 90% before and we're at 72% now, we know that there's something within the system that hasn't been found. And so we were recommending to do an additional leak survey in addition to the one that we do every year, because we have a strong indication that there's something going on that we haven't yet found.
There are at least two, and maybe more companies that make leak detectors to be installed and be functioning all the time. They'd be owned by us. Have you ever looked at doing that in our system? And is that doable, or do you have to put 50 of them around, so you have to start digging up streets again and whatnot?
We did, and in fact, we tested one of the systems that was compatible with our water meter reading system, so it provided us real-time data. So we took these leak listening devices, and you can put them on these nodes on the actual operating nut of the valve, and it will send back data, and it has a computer system that will tell you when it believes that a leak has been found. Unfortunately, there's two parts. One, through our testing, we put them throughout the village, we did not find it to be as effective as we had hoped. The second part is, as you alluded to, it's expensive, as in order to be able, you can buy 6 of these devices, but when you have 1,000 valves in your system, you can only listen to 5 at a time, and so you'd have to be constantly moving them, which really isn't efficient, because you don't know when the leak's going to happen at that particular spot. The third point I guess I would also offer is, and in this experience, kind of what's happening out here, is that what I have found in my experience with it is leak locating as much of a science as it is an art. The individuals that do this work, are listening for specific patterns that they hear. And in fact, sometimes bigger leaks are harder to hear than the really small, tiny ones that make a lot of noise. And so we have found that the leak locating companies, at least at this time, what we believe is the best technology for trying to find those undiscovered leaks.
Thanks.
All right, the next is professional services, and that's the water rate study. Staff is working on the completion of the water rate study this year. The study will evaluate funding for future capital improvement needs and operational expenses against proposed and existing water rate structures. We're currently in the process right now of analyzing the data and rate structure alternatives, and we hope to be able to have this completed and presented to the village board in the second quarter of 2020. Next, under professional services, the GIS system. We continue to make a lot of progress on our GIS system. We continue to do most of our work in updating our utility atlases through GIS. We have individuals now, instead of having paper maps, we're actually using these handheld devices in the field so that we're all working off of the same database. It's been a real great system that makes us more efficient. Next is the leak survey. I won't touch on this too much because we've already talked about it, but we recommend continuing with the leak survey each year. Next is the water main and capital improvements. In general, the repair or replacement of underground utilities should be considered at the same time when we're reconstructing the roadway. Over the past 2 years, the village has invested approximately $2.8 million in water main replacements. So this includes Brewster, Ashland, Blackstone, as well as Park. Some of the water mains that were replaced this past year were 120 years old, that were installed in actually 1900. So the other thing that we've talked about before related to the water main replacements has been lead service lines, as this is a topic that is definitely in the news. Over the past number of years and past projects, the village has offered residents 3 options when we uncover a lead service line as part of a capital improvement. So the first option the residents have is that they can participate with the village as part of its capital improvement project at a cost of $5,000 to have the water service line replaced from the B-box all the way into the home. The second option that residents have is that they can select their own contractor to have the water or the lead service line replaced. And then third option is they can leave it in place. For the Blackstone project, of the 26 lead service lines that were uncovered, 16 were replaced. And for the Ashland Avenue project, of the 32 lead service lines, 21 were replaced. And again, we talked about the Brainerd Avenue STP project. In 22-23, we've included $1.75 million for the replacement of this water main. We estimate the current cost is about $2 million, so as we get closer to that project, we may have to adjust budget figures. And then the other capital project that we have proposed is for not this fiscal year, but the next one, is the repainting of the Tilden Avenue water tower as it's starting to show signs of a deterioration and rust. And that concludes the water fund.
Thank you, Ryan. Questions on this part of the capital list? Seeing none. Oh, go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
So where we are is an audit item, right, Lou?
Right, if we fall below 80%, that's an audit finding that they would include in our
As a
upcoming audit.
deficiency.
Yeah, I think what Ryan's talking about is a more specific number, real-time number over the course of the entire fiscal year. We're a little bit under 80%. I think we're closer to 78% in total. We did have higher accountability earlier in the year. If we're able to correct that, there's still a possibility we could meet that audit threshold by the end of April 30th.
Thanks.
One last thing I did want to mention as well, and following up on something Trustee Holder brought up, the possibility of the board considering bonds in the future for the street resurfacing or street reconstruction projects. Since we typically look to do water mains as part of the street reconstruction project, I think it'd be something the board might also want to consider if they're looking to do a large, significant investment in the street projects at that time. You'd also be looking at doing a large investment in the water mains, corresponding water mains, which would also require a corresponding bond issue. Street repair and water mains have a very close correlation in terms of cost, so you'd be looking at just about a one-for-one additional expenditure on the water main side. Again, that'd be street reconstruction projects rather than the street resurfacing, but again, it's a significant investment in the infrastructure.
Thanks.
The $18 million figure you offered earlier, is that inclusive of water mains with those streets?
Yeah, that 18 million figure is a total, if you took everything in every category and added it up about how much maintenance is there, it's 18 million, but that's not necessarily the cost of the streets that are in the poor condition or the failed condition. Those are much lower numbers.
Thank you.
Just to point out, it wasn't that long ago that the village board elected to redirect some funds that were going towards other projects to focus more directly on streets. We were putting in about $1.6 million into street projects every 6 years. In those alternate years, every 3 years, we were looking at doing segments of the Mars storm sewer. Because of the need for the streets, the board elected to transfer those funds from Mars into the street projects. One of the other things that we had an opportunity to do was to increase the funding for the streets based on the new MFT rates that were implemented back July 1. That's providing about an additional $200,000 annually to the village's street project funds. So those funds were directly, again, right into the street projects.
Thank you, Lou.
All right, sewer fund. So similar to the water fund, the village's goal is to maintain sewer fund reserves at about 50% of operating expenses. Based on recent capital expenditures, we estimate that sewer fund reserves at the end of the fiscal year will be $253,000 or 25% of operating expenses. No additional sewer rate increases are proposed at this time, pending the results of the current water and sewer rate study. Next is sewers. Cost estimates for sewer main rehabilitation were developed based on the most recent sewer televising videos. most of the sewer repairs that are identified, we can repair without having them be incorporated as part of a roadway project. So most of the time, they are sewer lining, so you'll see a lot of longitudinal cracks that can be repaired via sewer lining, or they might be individual spot repairs. Due to the reallocation of the sewer lining funds and capital projects to fund the Brewster Avenue roadway project, no sewer lining was done this past year. And then the last thing to note is in fiscal year 1920, expenditures reflect the transfer of $3 million from the sewer fund to the capital projects fund to consolidate all of the funding for the 50th Street Storm Sewer Project. And this amount reflects the proceeds and interest from the 2015 bond issue. And then lastly is the sewer lining program. And again, I already mentioned, we are planning to include $200,000 for sewer lining this next fiscal year in 2021. The way that we select sewers is we have a ordinal ranking whereby we include every sewer that we televise. We rank it in terms of its need. So when we have $200,000 available, we put that towards the sewers that are identified as in most need of repair first. And that concludes the sewer fund.
Great. Questions for Ryan? Feel free, board, as you do often, to email or members of the public from what you've heard to Ryan or anybody up here on the board as to the different aspects of our capital fund. I would say that this also does not require we dig into our reserves. Again, back to Trustee Holder's comments about audits, we do like to keep a certain percentage of reserves. So what we're doing here relies on the economic base generated by the village and our visitors. And, you know, we will constantly pursue grants when we can. The often referenced pedestrian safety grants actually was a legislative grant from Representative Durkin, and it was originally for a pedestrian walkway over Ogden Avenue when the previous development to Uptown LaGrange was promoted. And so we've tried to keep that intact for when we either wanted to enhance safety at that intersection, as many as 50,000 cars a day through there, or other pedestrian safety activities. And then to Trustee Gale's point, we will see with the passage of a national infrastructure bill that does flow to LaGrange. It does help us in specialized projects. Certainly the state capital bill does. It all complements each other. And so, you know, again, Ryan, appreciate you putting out a thoughtful program here. To the Board of Trustees, thank you for your input. And this will be continue to be picked over and keenly looked at as you roll up a budget in April at your regular meeting. With that, do you have any further questions, Andre, for us or needs in terms of feedback at this time?
No, Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you and the entire team there. Now we have another matter to attend to in closed session under item 9 on our agenda. So I would ask Board of Trustees approval by a roll call vote to convene in closed session, and then we will not reemerge out of closed session. We will adjourn our meeting after that.
I move that we move to closed session, executive session.
Second.
Thank you, Trustee McCarty. Trustee Gale. It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Clerk, roll call vote, please.
Trustee Augustine.
Aye.
Trustee Gale.
Aye.
Trustee Holder. Trustee Katina.
Aye.
Trustee Kukla.
Aye.
Trustee McCarty.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes. We'll move into closed session and reconvene as a full board at a regular meeting on February 10th. Thank you.